It is good to see you here this morning, and it's great to have those of you who are watching online. Welcome, welcome. We appreciate you being here. Only announcement I have this morning, again, pierogies. If you want to get pierogies, you can go to Welcome Center and you can buy pierogies. You can order 10 or 300 or 1,000 pierogies if you want. It all goes to help Hearts for Hunger, our food pantry here at the church. Welcome Center. If you want pierogies, there they are, okay? Order them. They're not like there yet, okay? I want to tell you a little story. Sunday school teacher teaching first and second grade. And he's going to teach about heaven. So he wants to find out, what do first and second graders know about heaven? Where are they at? So he says, I want to ask you a question. He says, suppose that I was to sell my house. And as I sell my house, I have a garage sale, and I sell everything in my house, and I sell my car, and I give all the money to the church. Will I go to heaven? And the kids look at him and say, no. Okay. He said, suppose I go over to the church, and I mow the yard, I clean the inside, I scrub all the toilets, I take care of everything the church needs to take. Will that get me into heaven? And they all said, no. Okay, let's make this, he said, a little more personal. If I'm very kind to all the animals, and I love children, in fact, I give children candy, will that get me to heaven? And they said, no. So he's, okay, so what do I got to do to go to heaven? And one of the little boys stands up and said, you got to be dead. Today we start a 3-part series on heaven. Who goes there? Other than dead people. It's interesting to me, statistics have been taken, and most Americans, in fact, it is a large majority of Americans. When you talk to Americans today, and they'll tell you that religion, faith, Christianity is on the decline, church attendance on the decline, I understand that. That's a reality that we're dealing with. But the amazing thing is, when you talk to Americans about, do you believe in heaven and afterlife, it's in the high 80% of Americans say yes. And amazingly, most of those who say they believe in heaven believe also they're going there. All right? Most Americans say, we're going there. When questioned further, most Americans also admit, well, it's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot that I'm not too sure about. And don't ask me much about it because I can't explain it, but I'm sure somebody has worked it out because we believe that. And if so many people believe that there's a heaven and we're going to go there, it has to be true, right? The majority's always right. We have a general sense that there's something beyond this life. It's often referred to as heaven, and it's a good place, and we just assume that we're going there. In fact, most Americans are absolutely confident that it's just going to work out. It's all going to work out. And if you ask them to go deeper, it's like, I don't have to think about it. I don't have time to think about it. I got kids to raise. I got to earn a living. I got a test to take. I got to do all these things. I don't have time to give it much thought. But they say they know there's life after death. There's some sort of heaven, something going on. And we're confident I'm going to go there. This whole idea of heaven and earth and all these things, it's this idea that we have an assumption, a belief that good people go to heaven. That's the first assumption, that good people go to heaven. And there's probably some of you in here, or many of you that think this. And the second assumption is, I'm a good person. So we make these assumptions. We believe that, well, if I die, I'm sure it's an afterlife. There's a heaven, and I'm good. I'll go there. Now, some Christianity rejects that whole idea. Some Christians believe part of that idea, and some Christians believe even more of that idea. But there's sort of advantages to believing that way, if you want to be very honest. I mean, if I can just look at this whole idea of good people go to heaven and I'm a good person, there's an advantage to that. I mean, we base that on the system being fair, right? That's what we base it on. I mean, after all, God has to be fair. If you're good, He just takes you in, right? It makes only sense if you think about it that way. Good people should be rewarded for being good in this life. And for the most part, people know what's good, and they know what bad is, and they know how to be good. The whole idea is sort of embedded in us. Every religious system has that idea. Every system worldwide, talking about a faith system, has some idea how to get to heaven. I mean, there's times that you can crawl on your knees for 14 miles or 500 miles to a certain mountain, and you can do that, and you can earn, because you did that, you were good enough. You were good enough. And the second thing we like about that idea, about good people go to heaven, is the assumption that we are good enough. We're a good person. In fact, and I'll say this because you're here this morning, okay? Because you're here, and I know that really good people come to Pleasant View. And really good people watch this service on Pleasant View. So, you're better than most good people. Now, you wouldn't say that out loud. Don't ever say that out loud. We don't like judgmental people, and that sounds like we're judging other people, saying we're better. But sometimes we just look around, and in our minds, in our self-talk, we're saying, oh, I'm much better than them people. I'm so much better. I'm not Mother Teresa, but I'm better than most people. So I'm pretty sure if good people go to heaven, I'm in. All right? I think there's a third advantage to this idea that good people go to heaven and you're a good person and you're in it. That whole idea supports the notion of a good God. Because a good God would have a good heaven that takes in good people, right? I mean, we don't read in the Bible. You take the Bible, for example, if you only want to refer to the Bible. In the beginning, an evil God created a bad earth. We don't hear that, do we? No, we don't. Nobody says there's an evil God. Nobody says he's a bad God. He's a good God. So our assumption has to be right? He's a good God. And then there's sort of another advantage to it. If we think of it, it's sort of like a backdoor advantage, but if you believe God's a good God and that good people get to heaven, that sort of motivates people to be good, right? It sort of motivates you to be good and not be bad. Because, if you aren't good, you might go to that I don't want to talk about that place. I don't like to think about that place because I don't want anybody to go there, and I don't even want to talk about it. So this motivates you to be good. It's an advantage, right? The way it is. After all, you should be rewarded for being good. Because there's a lot of people who aren't good. And you sometimes don't want to be good, but you'd be good because you're motivated to be good. So you should be rewarded for that, right? In fact, it's sort of like this ought to. You ought to be good. Everybody ought to be good. I like that word, ought. So we ought to be good because we know better. We ought to do this and we ought not to do that. Because if you do what you ought not to do, you're bad. And even though you know you shouldn't, you ought not do what you do, it causes your conscience to be disturbed to help you ought not do it again. Is that making sense to you? I hope it does somewhere in that ought. But that's how we look at it sometimes. We just, ought to just hovers over humanity and affects us all. It's a good pressure that we ought to listen to. Now there's a problem here. There's a problem with good people, that good people go to heaven, this whole idea. Even though that most people believe it, the reality is some of you that believe that, you haven't really given that a lot of thought. You haven't really thought it through, all right? Because when you actually stop and think about that good people go to heaven and you're a good person, you haven't really thought that through well. Because when you do, when you scratch under that surface, under that idea, and you start to get to the reality of what it is, it starts to fall apart. It actually begins to become a little bit absurd that we believe that. But now I'm not trying to talk you out of it. I'm just bringing up some things, okay? This is just a little opening for this whole series. There's some really unsettling realities to this based on eternity, us finding eternity on our assumptions. All right? We assume. Do people in Russia assume something different? What about Japan? Or any other country? What are their assumptions? Are they the same as ours? I wonder. You see, the reality is humans have no indisputable, totally guaranteed, agreed upon, divinely revealed standard of goodness. What's good? What is that? Who sets that standard? Where's the rule book? Some of you were sitting there, come on, Jay, quit fooling around. You know the Bible is the standard. Well, if you believe that good people go to heaven and I'm a good person, don't go to the Bible. Don't go there. All right, I'm just telling you. It's not the place to go. The Bible's not real clear on giving you a standard, especially the Old Testament, okay? I want to look at why it's important that we don't just look at, we think we know what good is and what bad is and what's evil and what's not evil, because it changes. It changes. You realize that? The good and evil changes? Let me give you an example. Today, when we think of men and women, it would be so wrong to not consider men and women equal, to think on them on the same level. But do you realize, about 75 years ago, that was not even thought of? That women had to fight virtually to get to vote because men thought you weren't smart enough. So we look at that and we say, that was really evil, that was wrong, that was terrible. So if those guys, men, who thought that that was should be, that women just aren't the same as men, and that was, from that point backwards, that was it. You know, you women, I'm sorry, but you used to be considered simply property. No rights in most of history. So if we look and we measure goodness And that goodness moved. Now we look at it and we say, that's so evil. That means probably from about 1915, 1910, maybe 1900, there wasn't but 10 men that made it into heaven. Because they thought that was good. And we know today that's evil, right? That's a big evil. And ladies are saying, preach it, brother, preach it. Well, ladies, I got to go a little further with you. Because there's an evil in the world. So many people today think it's just America, that America, we had slaves and we were the only country ever and we were terrible for having slaves. And I beg to differ. I beg to differ greatly. That after the 1800s, I know we had a civil war, but a lot of things were going on even after the Civil War where people had slaves. They just called them indentured or, we hire them, but we kept them enslaved in other ways. And we look at slavery today and we say, it's so wrong. How can you ever own another person, right? Don't we think that? Don't we think that's wrong? And we think it's an evil. How can it be? Yet there's slavery today in the world. Over 150 years ago, there was slavery virtually everywhere. It was just thought normal. Some people were made to be ruled. Some people were created to be owned. That was not even thought of anything evil about it. But today we think, oh my word, that's so horrible. And ladies, I hate to tell you, you were some of the owners. So if we think slavery's so bad, man, you realize there's not many good people in heaven because generations and generations and thousands of years of slavery. And they surely couldn't have made heaven, right? So what I'm trying to say, I'm using those examples to tell you that what's good is a moving target. We are trying to hit a target that's not locked in. It's a standard that we've created in our minds, and we're basing eternity on us being able to hit a moving, undefined target that changes. I mean, how many of you, let's say you're over the age of 40, and you might be even over the age of 30, and realize that I actually have changed in my own generation, in my own lifetime, of what I think was good and what is bad. Haven't we? I have. I absolutely have. And those are the areas that are realities. We have changed what we thought was good, what was fun, what was this, and now we realize, and it's different. So how are we setting up good? How do we measure that? Who holds the measuring stick for that? I said, a lot of people will say, the Bible. And again, I'm just saying, if you believe good people go to heaven, you're good people, don't go to the Bible. But I know a lot of people who do, and they'll say, well, I'll tell you something, Jay. I live by the 10 Commandments. I hear that a lot. I follow the 10 Commandments. That's the standard. Well, I'll tell you something. I hear that, and if anybody ever says that to you, I say, oh, okay. Can you name them? What are they? Ask them. You're telling me you are basing your eternity on following the 10 Commandments, and I tell you that there's going to be extremely few who will know all 10. And what you're doing is you're saying, I'm basing my eternal life on 10 commandments that I don't even know. But I guess that's better than knowing them, because then you can we think I'm doing okay. Right? That's what we like to think. We sort of go over it, because if you examine the 10 Commandments, you know you didn't keep any of them. But if we don't know them, we can believe about anything you want. If you read in Exodus and Deuteronomy and you follow the 10 Commandments, in fact, you can read the whole Old Testament. You don't see any promise of an afterlife, in essence, of how am I going to spend time with God in heaven. It's not there. When it talks about heaven, it refers to the sky. If you follow the Ten Commandments, it never says you're going to heaven. It never quotes that. Now, someone may say, well, we'll go to the New Testament. You don't want to do that. If you believe that good people go to heaven and I'm a good person, I'm just telling you, if you believe that, to save your belief, don't go to the New Testament. Because in the New Testament talks more about heaven than any other religion in the world about an afterlife. It's in the New Testament. All right? It's there. I want to tell you about one guy. I want to give you an example. There's Paul. His name was Saul. And Saul was educated. He went to the university. He was so smart that Camille, who was the smartest professor there was, basically said, I can't teach Saul anything else. He knows absolutely everything. He is beyond me. That's how smart Saul was. Now, Saul was able to quote the Old Testament by heart. He memorized it. He could read straight through it. He could start in the back with the last chapter and read it backwards. I can't even imagine that. He was a Pharisee. He had reached the highest level of a Pharisee. I mean, you talk about people that knew the Ten Commandments and the 613 other added commandments that helped them do the Ten Commandments. He was the man. If any good person could go to heaven, it's Saul. And then he met Jesus. And he became Paul. And I want to read you something that he wrote. This is a man who lived by the law and would say, I'm definitely good enough. Who meets Jesus, and if you're thinking, well, what does Jesus say? Again, you may not want to listen to this, but he met Jesus, and he says this, there's no one righteous, not even one. Now, do you understand what that means? I want to explain that very clear because I think we have to be clear on this. He says there's no one good enough. Not one. Not one of us. There's no one good enough. See, but wait, you believe good people go to heaven and I'm a good person. But here's this really, really great religious person who says no one is good enough. Well, that's a little sketchy, isn't it? And then he writes another thing that most of us, if you've been to church, you've heard this. He says, all have sinned. Now, did you hear that? I just want to be clarified. Again, you don't have to listen to this, but I just want to make sure that it says, some have sinned? Is that what it says? Doesn't, is it? It's all. Who's all? We are. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Wow. But good people go to heaven, and I'm a good person. But yeah, I don't want to hear what Paul has to say, right? I have to deal with that. See, the Bible doesn't provide us with a standard of conduct. It doesn't provide us with a conduct that guarantees heaven. Even though the Bible and the New Testament especially is full of heaven, it's just the opposite. And at this point in our discussion, I want you to understand, I'm not arguing for the Bible here. And I know you think that's a little weird, but I'm trying to be fair to the good people go to heaven and I'm a good person side of it. All right? I'm just trying to be fair. I'm simply saying that Jesus never gave us a magic to-do list. It's not there. And if you think it is, you haven't read the New Testament. So there is this reality to that thought of good people go to heaven and I'm a good person that's sort of really unsettling because we have no standard established standard of good. It's not there. It's not anywhere there. There's another problem with that idea when you think about good people go to heaven. How good do you have to be? Is it like school? You get in, you pass with a 70%? Is that what it takes? 70% good, 30% bad? Does that tip the scales in your favor? Is it 51 to 50? What's the percentage? How do we know that? Is it a guess? Do we assume? We have to, if you think that good people go to heaven and I'm good. But the reality of you and I, the reality is we don't know, do we? We don't know what the standard is. How do we come up with that? Nobody told us. Does he consider our intellect? Does he consider our environment? Think about it. Environment's important. I'm a preacher's kid. I heard about sin before I had any idea what sin was. Some people, they're raised, they're not taught right from wrong. There's no morality. Surely God cuts them a break. Environment matters, right? That should mean a difference. I mean, if I had anything to do with it, it would make a difference. But the problem is I'm not God. I'm not God. I don't know what God's going to do at that time. And don't you think if our eternity depends on it, we ought to know? Don't you think? I mean, at what age does it start to count? What age is our accountability? We think we know, but do we really? When does God say, okay, start the tally sheet? I'm hoping it's 50. I'm just saying. Because if we're weighing good or bad, I think from 50 on it, a lot of good. That's my gauge, a lot of good. 50 and before, it's a little queasy. My memory gets faded. So when does it count? We think we know. We think we know, right? But when? How do we know? How about, do thoughts count? Or is it just what everybody sees? How about motives? I did that bad, but I had to. The situation. How do we know that? The big thing that really bothers me with the whole thing that good people go to heaven and I'm good people is, how do you know you did enough? Let's suppose, okay, just imagine with me, play along. On the scale of good and bad, we were young and we did stupid things, and we really have the scale tilted this way. And we start really doing hard, and we work hard. We're really doing good. We're really doing good. And then we have a heart attack. Wait, it wasn't done. That's not fair. Who determines that? I love, football is a great thing to me. I just love it. It's just like, it doesn't matter if you get 6 inches in front of the goal in that line and you don't make it, you don't get any points. What's the goal? What do you have to accomplish to get into heaven? Where is that? Shouldn't somebody establish that? I mean, would you be in a race where they say, well, where's the finish line? We haven't picked it yet. Just start running. Well, the course isn't marked out. It's okay. Just start running. We'll put the finish line somewhere else. Is that going to work? Do we do that? Well, aren't we doing that with this viewpoint that good people go to heaven and I'm a good person? Who says you're a good person? You do. Are you God? I'm not. Oh, I wish you wouldn't be bringing up all this stuff. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But the reality of it is, this breaks down, doesn't it? This doesn't hold together very well. This is a little different. And you know, when we're young, we think, oh, I got time. I got time. But you don't hold time. You don't know that. When I was growing up, I lost friends who were 14 or 15 or 16, and they're dead. They're gone. Their time to do good and try to weigh it out, it's gone. It's over. Who determines that? We think our good outweighs the bad. How do we know that? Who defines that good and bad? Who has the scale? Does God have the scale? What if we've done some bad things that you can't change, no matter how good, and then you waste all being good? What if that's the case? But we don't know, do we? It's a guess. Your eternity is based on a guess, a feeling, and you're the judge. But that's what it is, isn't it? Good people go to heaven. I'm a good person. Do we get to heaven and we're right there and they said, oh, you're so close. But you didn't make it. You're off. Right? How do we know? How about, oh, man, Jay, you were, yesterday, if you'd have died yesterday, you'd have got in. But you flipped out on that salesperson. And I mean, you just absolutely went bananas, and you said things that, moved you like 40 steps away. And if you'd have just, how did I know that? Right? You see, there's complications here, isn't it? There's complications with this. We could miss heaven by one good deed. You could get bumped out by one wrong deed. And if God holds the scale, why doesn't he tell us what it is? After all, if he's a good God would tell you how it goes. But if he doesn't, and be like a teacher or a college professor, and they tell you, hey, I'm not going to let you have a book. I'm going to grade you all on the final exam, and I'll give the final exam sometime. Would you call that a great professor? No, that would be terrible. Well, then, if God isn't telling us what the scale is, then he can't be a good God. Now, there are some other ideas that would help fuel this a little bit. There are some other ideas. I guess you could say as a pastor, I'm also involved in the funeral business because I do a lot of funerals. And I often think, because I've done so many funerals, I've done funerals that a lot of believers who believe in something else other than good people get to heaven, and they're good. And I've been with people who believe that. And I often think, what do I say? What do I say for somebody? Do I just say, Joe was a really good guy? He was good enough for us. I hope he's good enough for God. Does that give you comfort? Would that give you comfort? He's a great guy. I loved him. He's so funny. I hope God laughs. I've been to too many funerals where it's no hope. But the majority of mine that I've done are filled with hope. Sadness, grief over loss of someone, but that hope of I'll see them again in eternity. I will see them again. You see, there's different views. When we talk about who sets the standard, there is a belief that we don't have anything to do with it, that God wills, He's sovereign, and He picks who He chooses and who He doesn't. It's sort of like God said, David, you're in today. Samuel didn't do anything. What's the difference between him and it's God's will? God's sovereign. God can choose who He wants. Well, wait a minute, this has something to do with my eternity. I think we need a little discussion on this. Doesn't that seem a little out of balance? And then there's also a belief that man is so evil, so depraved, so degenerated, that we wouldn't know good if it bit us. That it's impossible for us to do good, and that's why God gets to choose. All right? It's just on God doing it. But it's interesting. I thought of ending the sermon here. I really did. I thought just stopping. But then I thought, well, I was actually going to conclude it this way and say, like, so what do we do? What do we do with this theory? Don't miss part 2. Hope you don't die till next week. See ya. And I thought, that is a terrible way to end this. I think it would be really cool to walk out and everybody, but eternally I'm not there, okay? So I'm not going to end it there. But I think it's very important, and we talk about this more in our next message. But according to Jesus, and I know I said you don't have to listen. You don't have to listen, but I want to give you what Jesus said, just so you hear it. He says good people don't go to heaven. According to Jesus, it's exactly the opposite of what most people believe, that heaven is the place that good people go. It's not necessarily true. And the fact that Jesus didn't believe that good people go to heaven doesn't necessarily make it so. I'm just telling you what He taught and what He said. And the interesting thing is Jesus believed in being good because He told His followers, you need to be good, you need to do good, and then He gave this impossible, unbelievable, He said, you need to be good to your enemies. Oh, come on, Jesus, right? But that's what He said. He believed that we were to be good, do good, always do good. But that's not what saved us. That doesn't save us. And He says so. He said that doesn't save us. He instructed His followers to do that, to be good, to be something. And even on the Sermon on the Mount, He took this whole idea to a whole other level. Because on the Sermon on the Mount, He talked about the Pharisees and the Sadducees, all the people that were being good to the law, and He said they aren't going to make it. They're hypocrites. They're hypocrites. He never once, in all His ministry, in all His writings, or the things that were written about Him, say if you're good enough, you'll spend eternity in heaven. He never said that. My point is, when it comes to good people going to heaven, you got to take everything about Jesus, everything He did, everything He taught, and you have to take it off the table. You can't consider, if you believe that good people go to heaven and I'm good enough, you can't consider what Jesus did. But you doing so will take a huge insight of someone who actually lived in heaven, who created heaven. You'll lose perspective of the only scale that matters. And it's interesting that the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who are considered the good people, got together with the evil people, the Romans, and together they worked to nail Jesus to a cross because Jesus said good people don't get to go to heaven. But what's so ironic about that is on the cross, Jesus indeed had the last words about that. Because as he's hanging on the cross, and we have two men beside him, and one guy, the other thief, he never had a chance. That man was evil. He was bad to the bone. He's dying because he was a bad man. He didn't go to church. He wasn't baptized. He had no chance to take the scale. And do you know what he did? I mean, a couple minutes before this realization hits him, he's telling Jesus, come on, and cursing at him, get down and save us, and yelling just the same in the crowd. And finally, he looks at Jesus and he realizes this man's different. This man is the Son of God. And he looks at Jesus. He has all kinds of evil and hurt and things he has done. And he simply says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. He didn't even know the Roman road. He didn't pray the sinner's prayer. He didn't do anything that we think you have to do to come to Jesus. And what did Jesus say to him? A not good man, a bad man, a man that just days before would have slashed your throat for a half a cent. Today, you will be with me in paradise. Today. That doesn't seem fair, does it? That just doesn't seem right. I mean, if we believe good people, go to heaven and I'm a good person, that just, oh man, I don't want to hear that. But that's what happened. And that's a reality. John wrote the Gospel of John. He was one of the 12 disciples. And I want you to think about something seriously. I know I'm running out of time. These guys lived with Jesus for 3.5 years. They would tell you that when they came to Jesus to be his students, his disciples, they believed that good people went to heaven. That's what the Jews were taught. They basically follow the law, you'll be all right with God. All right? Follow the law, you're all right with God. Those disciples believed that. They weren't always good guys. All right? They weren't. But after they were with Jesus, and after the resurrection, their view totally changed. The whole outlook of how they viewed eternity changed. And this is what John wrote, and it's familiar to many of you. For God so loved the world. Now let me ask you something. Just make sure we're clear. Who is the world? Who? Us. Us. We're the world, aren't we? For God so loved the world. Are you selected? You know what? You're just here this morning. And I keep saying, you know what? You aren't here by accident. None of us. For God so loved the world, all people. That's people you and I don't love. That's people, we think that God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever behaves like him, is that what it says? Whoever behaves correctly, whoever does good, it doesn't say any of that. No, it doesn't. Whoever puts their trust in him, which means believes in him, that person will not be lost to God. They shall not perish, but they will have what? Eternal life. Do you hear that? That's a promise. That's an assurity. That's definite. There's no guess. Is it because I'm good? No, it's because He's good. It's because I put my trust in what He did for me, on His sacrifice, His righteousness, His holiness. His goodness covers my life. My life. Your life. And if we believe in Him, accept Him, that's how it's done. That's how it's done. You see, God doesn't have to give us an upgrade for every generation of what's good or what's not, because it's covered. It's covered by what Jesus Christ did on the cross. We only need to come one time. We don't have a to-do list. We trust Him. And we walk with Him. There's a psychologist. She's not a believer. And she talks about being asked by parents, what do I tell my kids if we don't believe in God or heaven? And she says, you lie to them. You tell them heaven's real. You just lie. Make it up. I want to tell you something. When you accept Jesus Christ and you believe in what He did on the cross, you don't have to lie to your children. You don't have to lie to your grandchildren. You don't have false hope. You don't have to lie to yourself, because Jesus Christ paid the price for you and I. And we know. You don't have to wonder. You don't have to guess. We don't have to weigh it out. Because Jesus is complete. So what do? You come back for heaven part 2. Would you pray with me? Our Heavenly Father, you know all too well that way too many of us cling to this idea that we can live our life any way we want, and you're just going to open the gates and let everybody in. But if we consider your word, and I do, your word tells us that's not at all how it happens. And you do not condemn us. Our sin, that's what separates us from you. And I just pray, if there's anyone here that clings to the idea, that even thinks that, okay, I'm a good person, I'm going to make it, I'll be all right with God, we're tight, to realize if you don't know Jesus Christ, we're not right with God at all. Touch our hearts. Touch us at the very soul. So we know, without a doubt, where we will spend eternity. I ask Jesus to do that in your precious name. Amen.